12:30 a.m. local time, Bojatkovo, Russia. In a locked office 120 miles from the Kremlin, a single alert slides across a screen and everything changes. Igor Sechin, Russia's oil czar, reads the headline and knows in that instant that a vital artery feeding the nation's war machine is on the line. The Ryazan-Moscow pipeline is no ordinary infrastructure. It is 120 miles of steel delivering 1.22 million barrels a day, roughly 30% of the fuel Moscow needs to keep tanks rolling and planes flying. To some, it's a line on a map. To others, it is the beating heart of a military economy. Tonight, that heart will be probed. This is the story of how a small, cheap toolkit, decoys, 2 FPV drones, a fiber optic leash, and ruthless timing was assembled to strike at a $3 billion lifeline. Strategic assets are guarded for a reason. Around the pipeline, the Russians have stacked defenses you read about in manuals. S-400 complexes with 92 N6E radars that can spot high-flying threats hundreds of miles away. Kasuka-4 electronic warfare blankets meant to blind incoming signals, and Panzer S-1 surface-to-air batteries ready to shred anything that shows itself. They are formidable, designed to rule the sky. But physics plays favorites. Those multi-million-dollar systems excel at looking up. They struggle against insects of steel flying inches above the treetops. A drone hugging the ground at 130 feet can slip beneath the sweep of the big radars. That blind spot is the exact hinge this mission was built to swing on. The operation began like a chess opening, noisy, visible, and intentionally obvious. 11:15 p.m., August 25, 2025, Belarus border. Under the cloak of night, Kiev launched a flock of 15 Mugen 5 decoy drones, cheap, loud, and gloriously expendable. Think of them as plywood billboards with wings. Each costs roughly $500, and their purpose was theatrical. Fly fast, fly stupid, and die in patterns the defenders could not ignore. While Russian radars and jammers reacted to the plywood parade, a parallel thread of the plan unfolded. Lyot long-range drones surged toward the Ryazan refinery. These were higher-value, real threats, meant both to punish the refinery and to feed the illusion that the main effort lay there. The Ukrainian commander made a brutal choice: strike both, confuse everything, and force the defenders' hands. But the deepest secret was not the noisy decoys or the Lyot sorties. It was a battered, unmarked panel truck that rolled quietly into a woodline 12 miles from the Bojatkovo pipeline section. Inside that truck were 2 Reboth FPV drones, small, lightning-fast, armed with shaped charges, each spooled to a 12-mile fiber-optic tether. That truck was a Trojan horse, ordinary to any passing eye, lethal to the map that mattered. Down in a concrete bunker 30 feet under the ground, Russian operators watched the sky bloom with contacts. 15 slow blips, the Mugan decoys, appear first. Then faster dots punching toward the refinery. The commander calls up the big toys. Kasuka-4 to full power, Panzer S-1 batteries to engage, S-400 launchers to elevate and fire. On the surface, the defense looks textbook. Jamming pulses rip across frequencies, decoys lose links, and the Lyot attackers go up in light. But experience has a nose. The commander feels the setup in the bones, too loud, too obvious. He orders an Orlan 10 into the corridor, a quiet, low-flying recon bird meant to sniff out anything hugging the trees. The hunt has begun. The hunted have just slipped into the hunter's view. The fog lay heavy across the woodline as the first Reboth eased into the night. From the panel truck's open hatch, it looked almost fragile, a dark dart that slid off a pneumatic rail and vanished into the trees, trailing a thin, silvery thread of fiber behind it. To anyone watching on a conventional link, the drone would be a ghost. To its operator, tied to the truck by that fiber, it was a lifeline, a crystal-clear, unjammable 4K view of everything below. But the Russians were not idle. The Orlan 10, that quiet, professional workhorse, climbed into its reconnaissance arc and began sweeping the corridor with a thermal eye. In the concrete bunker, the Orlan's feed painted a different picture than the S-400 screens. Beneath the big radar cone, a small fast contact cut between the dark trees. A tiny signature, a faint heat line, and then confirmation. Something was moving where nothing should move. Back in the truck, the operator dropped the rebot into a break between tree cover, terrain masking at its finest. The drone hugged the canopy, dancing between trunks, its tether unspooling like a lifeline through the fog. The operator watched trees and hedgerows pass under the feed and felt the impossible calm that comes before a gamble. Then the gamble almost died. As the rebot ripped across a farmer's field, a 30-second sprint to clear a critical gap, an intercept shout crackled from the Orlan's audio. Thermal locked. Solution computed. A Panzer S-1 fired. The night split as a missile screamed in, a streak of anger aimed with millimeter precision. The rebot survived by a hair's breadth. The missile tore past, whipping up a gust that rocked the bird in its flight. The strain on the fiber was instantaneous and savage. In an instant, the clear feed became white noise. The fiber, thin, immense in its length, snapped like a thread. The drone cartwheeled into the earth. For a heartbeat, triumph sat in the bunker. They had the wreck. They had a place to start. But victory carries iron teeth. That 12-mile glass thread, now broken, lay like a bright breadcrumb in thermal traces and signal logs. The Orlan didn't need to see the truck to follow the deadline. The path would lead the hunter straight to the den. Inside the truck, alarms screamed. The mission had been compromised. Orders came fast and brutal over encrypted channels. Evacuate now. Evacuate. The driver slammed the van into motion, tires clawing at mud, the panel truck lurching away down a rutted track. Every second the vehicle stayed close to the launch site, the risk increased. VDV units were already being vectored to the last known coordinates. Desperation sharpened thinking. The second operator made a brutal, rule-breaking call. The hot launch. Pneumatic rail, no checklist. Catapult the drone while the truck still moves. It was the kind of decision that turns technicians into gamblers. The crew knew the odds. If the drone failed to stabilize, the whole mission would collapse. If it lived, they still had minutes, maybe less, to finish the strike. The rail spat the second rebot into the fog, and for a chaotic few moments, the world held its breath. The drone shuddered, gyrods fighting to level, once wobbly wings finding rhythm. Slowly, steadiness returned. The fiber unspooled behind a truck that had become a metal heartbeat racing through the night. In the bunker, the Orlan redoubled its search. Its thermal camera painted long, bright lines across fields and hedgerows. Its operator traced those lines until he found a faint, hot seam. Steel reflecting in the fog. The commander's voice cut across the room. Bojatkovo corridor, converge. All assets, now the hunt tightened. The net closed. The panel truck barreled on, the second rebot sliding low and fast toward the pipe's curve. Every rustle in the trees might be a patrol. Every headlamp could be a VDV trap. Yet through the pilot's headset, a cold clarity emerged. Sight, speed, and the single immutable fact. There was only one true target tonight. The green line on the map, the narrow steel artery that fed a war, waited less than a mile ahead. The countdown had begun. The fog was a living thing, thick, cool, and deceptive. As the second rebot screamed low towards the pipeline's curve at Bojatkovo. For the operator, the feed was now everything. Crosshairs, speed, a sliver of steel shimmering in the moonlight. Behind him, the truck's engine roared like a warning. Ahead, the green line on the tactical map narrowed to a single target, a seam in the pipeline's armored skin that, if opened, would turn fuel into fire. At 12:25 a.m., the rebot made contact. 2 pounds of shaped charge met hardened steel, and the result was not a hole, but a rupture. The high-pressure gasoline inside the line atomized instantly, droplets suspended in air, an invisible fog of deadly potential. The smallest spark, the tiniest ignition, made the night an oven. The ignition came as a roar. A 300-foot fireball blossomed upward, turning the fog to daylight. The shockwave hit with a physical force. Trees bent, glass cracked in distant houses, and the ground seemed to pulse under the blast. For a moment, every radio, every watch, and every heartbeat synced to the same terrifying rhythm. The pipeline's external skin failed like foil under heat. For 200 feet, the steel unzipped. Fuel sprayed, ignited, and ran like a living thing along the valley's grade. Fire raced down the line, fed by the flow that once kept engines moving hundreds of miles away. Where men had planned supply lines and logistics routes, there was now a molten, burning wound. Inside the truck, the crew felt the world tilt. The pilot ripped his goggles off, bile rising as the shock hit. The driver fought the wheel through a rain of ash and embers. The panel truck, their Trojan horse, shuddered on. Mission completed, price paid. Within minutes, satellite and aerial feeds confirmed the scale. The rupture burned with a sustained intensity that had strategic consequences. Initial battlefield assessments ran like a fuse through command centers. The Ryazan-Moscow artery was severed. Supplies feeding the southern front would be cut by roughly 30%. Sorties and armored movements planned for the next 72 hours required rethinking. Back in Moscow, control rooms ran emergency scenarios. Igor Sechin watched teams estimate immediate fuel losses. Tens of millions of dollars in product vaporized, critical deliveries delayed, civilian fuel supplies jeopardized. Pipelines are more than steel. They are timing envelopes. Break one and scheduling collapses like a house of cards. On the front lines, the impact was immediate. Tank formations slated to refuel and push were ordered to halt and conserve. Air wings stood down for emergency redistribution of fuel to priority sorties. Commanders scrambled to reroute convoys across secondary pipelines and rail, but those channels were already stressed. Fuel rationing whispers moved through brigades like a cold wind. Politically, the symbolism struck deep. For a government built on energy leverage, a burning pipeline in the Russian heartland was more than a tactical victory for Kiev. It was a public relations wound. Images of a 300-foot fireball over Bodj at Kovo would ripple across global feeds, overlaid with maps showing halted convoys and shuttered gas stations. But the operation also illustrated a new calculus of war. Small, cheap systems, guided by satellite knowledge and human daring, can impose outsized costs on vast, expensive infrastructures. A panel truck and a pair of FPV drones had just done to fuel logistics what a dozen armored brigades might have taken weeks to achieve. As sirens began to wail and emergency crews mobilized, Kiev's strategists watched for the reaction that would define the next phase. Would Russia retaliate with kinetic strikes, cyber attacks, or political escalation? Or would Moscow move to close the vulnerability, tightening defenses and diverting resources away from the front? Either way, the night at Bodj at Kovo had rewritten the script. A $3 billion artery had been turned into a fiery classroom, teaching lessons in fragility, innovation, and the brittle intelligence of modern logistics. The inferno at Bodj at Kovo burned for 7 hours straight. By dawn, the flames were visible on satellite imagery, a glowing wound in Russia's heartland. At 6 a.m., emergency bulletins hit the Kremlin. The Ryazan-Moscow artery was offline. Civilian fuel supplies in Moscow would last 72 hours. For the army, the southern front instantly lost 30% of its gasoline and diesel. In his office near Red Square, Igor Sechin, the oil king, received the verdict. $50 million in repair costs, $250 million in lost refined fuel, disruption across 2 army groups. Putin's response was fury. If they can do it once, they can do it again. Retaliatory strikes followed within 48 hours, but they couldn't erase the fact. A $12,000 drone strike had crippled a $3 billion asset. On Moscow's streets, panic spread. Gas stations hung "no fuel" signs. Black market prices doubled. Social media mocked, "So much oil, no gas." Abroad, the fireball became viral propaganda. Analysts called it a proof of concept, a demonstration that cheap drones could break billion-dollar defenses. Energy markets rattled. Militaries worldwide took note. For the Ukrainian crew, driving back in silence, there was no celebration. Only the knowledge they'd shifted the balance. Kyiv gave it a code name, Operation Black Vein. History will remember it simply. One truck, one drone, one strike that made Moscow tremble. The real question isn't whether Ukraine can do it again, it's whether Russia can afford to let them try.